for investors and savers and the implications for the value of what they've saved or invested.
Now, for the benefit of a Detroit metropolitan area listener, I want to just kind of paraphrase and correct me or tell me if I'm not correct, but I believe this is a fair statement. I've heard you say things like, to the common man, you are the answer. It's your drive, it's your competition, your fearlessness, your entrepreneurship that built this country and made it great. It's the everlasting character of America which will rebuild it again. What do you say to a Detroiter who's been decimated, an automotive engineer, 48 years old, specialized in automotive, a CEO of a public relations company that relied on the automotive industry? What do you see for a Detroiter to look forward to?
Yeah, I mean, we need, to bring back our automobile industry. We need a vibrant automobile industry in the United States. We need it desperately. But we're not going to get it back based on some kind of government initiative or government plan. We have to recreate the automobile industry the way we created it in the first place. Why was Detroit the automobile capital of the world? It was because we were the freest country in the world. It was because American entrepreneurs didn't have to pay a lot of taxes and comply with a lot of regulations. And so we were able to produce automobiles more efficiently than everybody else. And American entrepreneurs had access to capital because Americans had sound money. We had gold-backed money, and we had a reason to save, and people didn't have to pay so much in taxes, so they were able to save, which meant businesses had access to capital. They could make the investments, the long-term investments in plant and equipment that was necessary to build things like automobiles, because it's very expensive. If you want to make automobiles, it's not like, opening up a store. You need machines. You need robots. You need computers. You need a lot of expensive equipment to produce automobiles and to do it efficiently. So we need to bring back our automobile industry, which means the government needs to get out of it, which means we should have let General Motors and Chrysler go bankrupt, not because, I don't want to make cars, but because I do. And I know that we're never going to make them profitably if the government's calling the shots. We need free markets. We need the equipment from General Motors to go up on the block so that somebody can buy those plants. They can operate them profitably. We can't preserve these union contracts. They need to be destroyed in bankruptcy court. These companies need to be unencumbered by these debts and these labor contracts that render it impossible for them to make competitive automobiles. Ultimately, if we do the right thing, we can rebuild our industrial base, but it isn't going to be easy. And unfortunately, because it's been so decimated, Americans are going to have to accept lower pay. I mean, that's the unfortunate consequence of what the government has done to our economy. By destroying our capital base, we're in a deep hole, and we've got to basically start over again. And starting over means we're going to have to start with lower wages. And eventually, if we become more productive, wages can rise, but right now they have to fall to reflect the fact that our economy is no longer as productive as it was in the past because we don't have the industries anymore. They're gone.
Now, you talk about what seems to me is going to involve maybe a lot of legislation to make these things happen. One of the criticisms that I think I've read a lot about is that whoever they might be, criticize that you don't have a whole lot of experience in writing legislation. How do you respond to that?
Well, we don't need to write legislation. The legislation is the problem. We need to repeal the legislation. And unfortunately, nobody in Congress has experience repealing legislation because nothing's ever repealed. And so in that respect, I've got the same amount of experience as everybody else. And that's why I want to go to Congress. I don't want to write any new legislation. I want to repeal the legislation that is the source of the problem. It's the rules and regulations that have been legislated into existence that have distorted the free market and have created these problems. And the other thing I want to abolish is all kinds of government programs. I want to cut the budget. The federal budget right now that Obama just announced for the next fiscal year is $3.8 trillion. That's absurd. We shouldn't be spending anywhere near $3.8 trillion. We shouldn't even be spending $2 trillion a year. We're only collecting about $2.4 trillion in taxes. I mean, if we were to get rid of the budget deficit, we'd have to get rid of at least 40% of the budget right now. In fact, for every dollar the government is collecting in taxes, they're spending $1.60. I mean, that's like somebody earns $100,000 a year and they decide to spend $160,000 a year. It doesn't work. So we need to shrink government dramatically, which means we got to abolish programs and cut spending. Not just freeze spending at some future date, but cut spending. Cut it substantially right now. And that's what I want to do. And if I get elected, I'm going to work to actually shrink government so that fewer people get checks from government, and so that people who are getting checks from government get smaller checks. That has to happen. And if we do that, then the people who are paying the taxes won't have to pay as much in taxes. And if the government stops borrowing all this money, then businesses might have access to capital so they can expand and make investments and hire people. But as it stands right now, no one's going to get hired because nobody's got capital because the government is taking it all.
Peter, as far as the Michigan perspective, like I say, we've been decimated. We've lost the claim of the Motor City, and it's very difficult for people that are struggling now to think about investing when, in fact, they really don't even have a job. They're worried about how to even maintain status quo. Now, I want to get into that a little bit later about some ideas you have for people who do want to invest. But if you look at it from a Michigander's perspective, who are, in your opinion, the key Michigan politicians, one, that should be ousted, and who are some of the Michigan politicians that are on the fringe of either being elected or are currently in office that you know of, that as Michiganders we should respond to and we should support?
Yeah, look, I don't know the names of the senators or the congressmen from Michigan. I'm not really familiar with the delegation. I'm not familiar with them for most of the country. But I certainly think that anybody who's been an incumbent is a good a likely target for voting out of office, because the incumbents on both sides of the aisle, whether Republicans and Democrats, were culpable in what happened. And I think we do need to make some changes. I think we need to bring people in who are not tainted by this system and this process, who can bring a fresh perspective and understanding of economics of the country, and people who really are going into politics not because they want it for a career, but because they feel it's necessary for the good of the country. I mean, that's why I'm running. I don't need to be a United States Senator. I have a much better job in the private sector, so it's going to cost me a lot of time and a lot of money to be a United States Senator. And so I'm not doing it because it makes sense for me. I'm doing it because it makes sense for the country, and so as an American, I benefit, but certainly as an individual, it's not a wise move for me. And so people know that I'm going there. I'm not going there to sell out my principles, which is what most people do when they're elected, because after all, when they get elected, all they care about is getting reelected. They want to stay there. They want to play the game so that they can, advance up the political ladder. I don't want to play any games. All I want to do is help clean up the mess that these career politicians made, and that's the only reason I'm going there. So I'm not going to spend any of my time trying to get reelected. I'm not going to spend any time fundraising. I'm not going to spend any time, trying to ingratiate myself with a Republican leadership so that I get the right assignments or I get their support when it comes time to run for reelection. I want to shake up the leadership of the Republican Party. It's been a disaster. Look at all the things that were done when the Republicans had the majority. They were the ones that were in charge. When the real estate bubble was inflating, they did nothing to do something about that. So, I don't think they're as bad as the Democrats, but, they are part of the problem. Now that the Republicans are in the minority, a lot of Republicans in Congress are saying a lot of the right things. Well, where were these Republicans 5 years ago, 10 years ago? They were still there. Why do they wait until they can't do anything, right? Why do they wait until they're so far in the minority and that they no longer have the White House to actually say the right things? It's because they know